Welcome to the Week in Politics with Michelle Grattan. I'm Nick Klomp, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Canberra. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, Nick.
The government had a victory this week, didn't it, getting its full income tax cut package through the Parliament. This is despite Labor trying to abolish the controversial third stage. What happened there?
The small players in the Senate were against the third stage by and large. They thought that it was too far away, that it delivered to higher income earners, and in general they would have liked to scrap it. They amended the bill, but then when the government held firm, said it's all or nothing, they weren't willing to deny the middle and lower income earners the tax breaks in the early stage. So they folded, therefore the government got the whole bill. It was a big victory. If the government hadn't succeeded in getting that bill through, then really the centrepiece of its budget would have been gone.
Labor is threatening to rescind that bill later on, before the final third stage ever comes into effect. Is that likely?
It says it would rescind both the second and the third stage, so it would go ahead, of course, with those tax cuts for the lower and middle income earners that are legislated. It would build on those tax cuts and give those people some more tax relief, but it would scrap the rest. Now, that's a risky move for Labor in the coming by-elections and in the election generally. That'll be a big issue. Malcolm Turnbull is very strong on saying that Labor isn't supporting aspirational voters. But on the other hand, surveys have shown that people have other priorities than tax cuts. They want fiscal repair, they want more spent on services like health and education. So there are going to be arguments both ways. Labor will be able to make a case on fairness grounds. It'll be able to say we'll use the money for other more worthy things, more worthy in our Labor view. But the government will say, well, many people who deserve a tax cut won't be getting it.
Meanwhile, the government ministers have repeatedly denied any plans of selling the ABC after the Liberal Federal Council passed a motion for its full privatisation. Should we take them at their word?
Yes, I think we should, because in practical terms, I think that when it got to the point selling the ABC would just be absolutely impossible, wouldn't get through the Senate, would be considered a huge and not good thing to do. Remember that all the polling indicates that Australians value the ABC. The Liberal Federal Council, which met last weekend, passed this motion. It reflected the strong ideological base of the rank and file Liberal Party members at the moment, but not either community view or indeed the view of the parliamentary party, even though, of course, the parliamentarians have been very critical of the ABC, the government parliamentarians. But it's just proved a distraction for the government. It would have much preferred that motion not be passed.
Yeah, I'm sure. Next week, of course, is the last sitting week before the winter break, and the government will be looking to get a few key bills through. Firstly, the foreign interference laws. Why are they so insistent to pass this legislation before the Super Saturday of by-elections?
The government's argument is that this legislation is necessary to protect the democratic process. The democratic process is most on show when there are elections, and of course there are 5 by-elections on Super Saturday. But I think it's also using Super Saturday as a sort of imposed deadline to try to concentrate the Parliament's mind on getting this legislation through. I think it probably will get it through, although it is going to be a close-run thing in the timetable. We've had one report from the Parliamentary Committee that's considering the bills. It's got another report coming today, and of course Parliament's in its final week next week, so there's not a lot of time for the government to sort out its response to the committee and for the Parliament to consider the bills. But nevertheless, I think that there is a will on both sides to get this measure in place and it probably will be done.
But also the government will be trying desperately to get the numbers for their big company tax cuts. How great a task is this, and are they likely to achieve it?
It's a big task. Malcolm Turnbull today, in the wake of the income tax cuts being passed, was sounding quite upbeat about the mission of getting the tax cuts for companies through, but as we meet today here, the numbers are not there. Now, with the Senate, of course, the numbers can shift in the negotiations quite quickly, but it is hard to see that happening. There'll be a lot of talks in the next few days, and Matthias Cormann, who's the government negotiator, Senate leader, is pretty astute at wrangling these deals, but this might be a step too far. I think it will be disappointing for the government if it loses this vote. It's interesting it's having a vote, because usually if it thinks it won't win, it doesn't, but it wants to put this to the Senate, but it won't be any sort of disaster, I don't think. If the tax cuts on the income tax side hadn't been passed, it would have been very bad, but in this case, the company tax cuts are not particularly popular in the electorate. The government will have to decide, however, whether it ditches them or whether it takes them to the next election. At this moment, it's saying if it loses next week, it will take them to the next election.
It's going to be a fascinating week as always. Michelle Grattan, thank you again.
Thanks, Nick.